I often refer to the first chapter you wrote in that book where you describe the computer mouse. I think you even have a picture of the computer mouse, something like this, actually.
Hmm.
The thumb ball computer mouse, which I use here at my desk. And you make this somewhat seemingly audacious claim that no one knows how to make this thing, right? That it's actually it's the distributed intelligence of societal cognition, the division of labor. I'm not sure how we want to frame this, that actually the supply chains and people interacting through money, which is obviously germane to this show, are what enable us to create a sophisticated piece of technology like this. But there's no single individual in the world that could sit down and just create the computer mouse from scratch.
Yeah, and in doing that, I was shamelessly borrowing an idea, which is, of course, partly the argument I make that we all borrow ideas. I was shamelessly borrowing an idea from oh, I've suddenly forgotten his name. He's called Reed, and forgotten his first name, but anyway, a guy called Reed in the 1950s wrote an essay called "I Pencil."
Oh yes,
It's
fantastic
a
essay.
it's a wonderful essay because I think it tells you more about how the world works than almost anything I've read in
Yes.
such a short space of time, short space of paper, as it were. And the pencil investigates his own existence, discovers that an awful lot of people contribute to the making of a pencil because there's somebody chopping down a tree to make the wood, there's somebody mining graphite to make the lead, there's somebody working in the pencil factory, there's somebody marketing the pencil, somebody retailing the pencil, but upstream there's a person brewing coffee for the man who goes to cut down the tree, etc. And when you think this through, you realize that there are millions of people involved in making the simplest object. And with the computer mouse, I make the point that, there's plastic and metal and silicon in this thing, and there's ideas that came together from different people in different times and different places, people who never met each other, combined collectively into how to make this computer mouse. But what is so extraordinary is that not one of them knows how to make a mouse or a pencil or anything else. The knowledge of how to make the simplest objects in our world does not exist inside human heads. It exists between and among human heads.
Yeah.
And that, for me, is tremendously important insight because it gets straight to the point that commerce, I don't like using the word capitalism, but some people do, is an immensely collaborative, cooperative business. It really does, through the division of labor, each of us doing a more and more specialized thing when we produce something so that we can be more and more diversified when we consume things, is the great story of the modern world and the reason why living standards have been able to rise. We've got, you make podcasts, I make books, nothing else. I'm useless at absolutely everything else. I certainly couldn't make my shelter, my clothing, my food, etc. So we've moved away from subsistence, from self-sufficiency, towards tremendously specialized output, but tremendously diversified input consumption. And that, for me, is the big theme of human prosperity, human living standards, human society, and human economic activity.
Yeah, yep. Again, to shout out that essay, it's poetry almost on the division of labor. It's a fantastic essay. I always encourage everyone to read that. I actually like it so much that we're going to be doing a little thing for it on the show. I'm just going to do a read of iPencil and then we'll put some animation over it at some point. But it's
Fantastic.
truly good.
That's great. Well, actually, somebody who read one of my books sent me an image of a pencil that explodes into thousands and thousands of strands at the top. It's a beautiful image. I'll send it to you if you like.
Yeah. Oh, please. Oh, so it shows all the individual commodities that go into the pencil, perhaps through the explosion.
Well, no, it just threads, but it gives you the a sort of visualization of the same thing. I
Yeah.
mean, I can find it if you like. It won't
Sure.
take
That'd be
long.
wonderful. We'll try to
Um,
put that in the episode, actually. Uh,
um,
as you're
yeah.
doing that, maybe I could try to form this next thought slash question. So it really, this is a theme I think that's been visited by a lot of thinkers and authors. Obviously, Adam Smith, going back to The Wealth of Nations, talked about the division of labor, possibly even coined the term the division of labor. I'm not sure if he was the first one to do that. Um, the book Sapiens, talked about the human capability of cooperating flexibly in large numbers, kind of being our, oh yeah, that's great.
Can you see that?
Yeah, that's a great
It's a lovely image.
cover image for the essay.
Yeah. Um,
For the audio,
yeah. Sorry, I
looks like
interrupted.
no, it looks like I mean strands of spaghetti sort of coming together into the pencil, and that's
Yeah.
the visual of
And I couldn't remember his name. He's called Leonard Reed, of course. So
great,
I
yeah.
give him
I was
credit.
just saying that this theme's been visited by a lot of thinkers and authors. I mentioned Adam Smith coining the division of labor. Um, Yuval Harari. I'm not particularly fond of him overall, his involvement with World Economic Forum and whatnot, but his book *Sapiens* I did read, and I thought when he described the human capability of being able to cooperate flexibly in large numbers through the use of symbol, that's kind of the human superpower.
Mhm.
And so the question or thought I wanted to pose to you here is like in this process, this when we are connected in economies and we're able to subdivide these phases or portions of the labor, what is this, portions of the production process into such fine things. As you said, you write books and I make podcasts, right? We're basically useless for everything else. We've,
Sorry, I didn't mean
we've
to imply
progressed
you.
so far, though, that we can be so hyper focused on one little niche activity. And we have this trust that everyone else will sort of just do the same thing. And then in that trust, we all get to enjoy the hyper specialized fruits of one another's labor.
Exactly.
That's what gives rise to, the luxury of modern living, basically. In addition to all the innovation and progressing living standards, et cetera. So what I wanted to ask about is like the role of money in this process. That, money is this, it's often called the language of human action or the language of value. It's almost like if this is, I always think about it through the metaphor of one collective hive mind, right? The price signal is coordinating all of this human action at scale that serves everyone. And money, I guess the metaphor I'd like to invoke is something like a neurotransmitter. Money's acting like kind of like a neurotransmitter for this global economic hive mind. And I
Mhm.
just wonder if you had thoughts about the role of money in this distributed cognitive process we call the global economy.
Yeah, I confess to being still a little confused about money. I did write about it at length in Rational Optimist. I've spent a lot of time thinking about money, and I'm not a monetary theorist or anything like that. The history of money is intriguing as well, but there's something about that subject that has never quite clicked for me.
Hmm.
It's partly the confusion as to whether it's a store of value or a medium of exchange. It's clearly both, but which comes first, which matters most, etc., is quite confused, I think. And then there's the whole question of the tokenistic nature of money. How can a piece of paper or even a bar of gold be valuable in itself? So for me, the best way to think about it is to go right back to first principles and say, what we are doing as human beings, almost uniquely in the animal world, by the way, is dividing our labor. I'll do what I do, you do what you do. We'll then both bring the fruits of our labor to the party and share them, and we're both better off because we're both focused and specialized and efficient at the bit we do. I'll catch the fish, you build the house. We're both better off. Yet clearly, if we had to barter fish for houses or fruit for entertainment or whatever it is every time, it would be way too complicated to arrange. What's the exchange rate for each of these different outputs? So we invented money as being the sort of middleman in all these exchanges. We'll value my fish in money and we'll value your house in money, and then we know exactly what the exchange rate is for everything. And that feels to me like the best way of thinking about money, which, as you can see, drives me towards the feeling that the medium of exchange is the really important feature of money, more so than the store of value. And for me, the development of Bitcoin and the conversations that went on before the invention of Bitcoin were really intriguing because they were wrestling with this issue. And in a sense, Bitcoin is the ultimate experiment in whether or not we can develop a much more perfect currency. Because the other problem with money that we've got today is the intrusion of government into, as it were, owning the money, deciding whether to print the money, and what the interest rate should be and all that kind of thing. So fiat currencies and the role of central banks seems to me to be a topic where real problems have been injected into human affairs, problems of inflation, problems of debt, and so on, which may outweigh the advantages of having the government in charge. Now, I'm quite influenced here by the writings of George Selgin, who is a monetary economist and a very good one. And in particular, he wrote a very interesting essay about the Scottish financial system in the 1700s when Adam Smith was in Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Free banking, right.
Yeah, and it's a free banking period because the official Scottish bank had backed a rebellion in 1715. The government said, "Well, right, we're going to charter a rival bank," and then there were other rival banks, and there were 5 or 6 banks that were able to issue currency in Scotland, and they developed mutual trust among themselves because they wanted their paper to be convertible by each other. And therefore, they were able to ostracize any bank that behaved less cautiously. And actually, it produced an extraordinarily good monetary system, which was destroyed almost overnight when, in the 1800s, the British government in London said, "Oh, this is no good. We can't have this," and said, "No, from now on, you have the pound issued by the Bank of England. And by the way, here's inflation, and here's all sorts of other problems that come with it." So there's part of me that is a real libertarian idealist about money who thinks that out there is a perfect bottom-up solution controlled by nobody, let alone central government, for how we operate the medium of exchange among people. But I admit that I'm not clever enough to know how we get there.
That's fantastic. You use the word invented, and I do think language, describing money as language, is probably the best way to describe it because it does seem to emerge naturally anywhere there are people interacting, as does language. And so therefore it is emergent, right? But there is this, so it's bottom up, but there are these top-down pressures like the state or government that attempt to commandeer that emergent phenomenon for its own institutional advantage. And it's not too unlike, I think, aspiring dictators or demagogues trying to manipulate the media, right?
Yep,
Actually,
exactly.
that's what money's often described as well, right? The universal medium of exchange. So it's
Yeah.
the communication systems that need to be co-opted to engage in social engineering. And I think natural language and money seem to be the two most important
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, just to tell a little story that I think is useful here, and I completely agree with you about it being an emergent phenomenon, not an invented phenomenon. I came many years ago. I came across um, an article called "Stingray Barbs for Stone Axes" or something like that, and it was about the exchange rate between stingray barbs and stone axes among different Aboriginal tribes in northern Australia in the 19th century. And what this person had worked out is that there was a stone axe quarry hundreds of miles inland, and there were people living on the coast who caught stingrays and used the barbs off these stingrays as spear points. And that if you traveled from one to the other, you find a changing exchange rate. So that, at the coast, stingray barbs are cheap and stone axes are expensive. And by the time you get inland, it's the other way around. And I just thought this was a wonderful example of a monetary system, if you like, that had emerged in a foraging society before Western contact, and that was nonetheless very sophisticated, and showed you kind of where money had come from. Now, I was then very intrigued by a paper I read about pierced shells of a particular species that were found inland in Algeria, northern Africa, dating from about 100,000 years ago. And these had been used as sort of jewelry or something like that. But the point is, they'd traveled hundreds of miles inland 100,000 years ago. Now, almost certainly they didn't do so by somebody picking up shells on the beach and walking hundreds of miles inland. Almost certainly he traded them with his neighbor, who traded them with his neighbor, who traded with them with his neighbor. So they ended up a long way inland. We find that pattern all over the archaeological record, but we never find it from 100,000 years ago in any other case. That really is a long time ago. And it shows that trade may be a lot older than language, possibly. Wow. Certainly older than farming or anything like that. And it reminds me of a wonderful remark that Adam Smith made when he said that, talking about the human propensity for truck, barter, and exchange, he said, "No man ever saw a dog make fair and deliberate exchange of a bone with another dog." And what he meant was this habit of swapping, sharing. I've got some of these. Would you like them? You've got some of those. I'd like them. Is deeply rooted in human beings, goes a long way back, very instinctive, and absolutely vital to the process of exchange, but also the process of inventing money.
That is fascinating. I've never heard that particular example you just shared, but I've long thought that it's very likely trade predates language. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.